Hello, my friends. Enjoy the video and don't forget to like and subscribe.
I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's a certain thrill in the decay, a beauty in the silence, and a morbid curiosity that gets under your skin when no one else is around. Some people chase urban legends or ghost stories. Me, I chase the physical remnants of lives that once were. That's what led me to the old Willow Creek Sanitarium. It was the kind of place that locals avoided even during the day. The building had been closed for decades, shuttered after a series of unexplained deaths in 1970s, and whispers of experimental treatments that crossed every ethical line imaginable. By all accounts, it was dangerous, but danger had always been my lure. I arrived in the middle of July. The summer air was thick and heavy, and the smell of damp earth and rot hung around the abandoned grounds like an uninvited guest. The trees had grown wild around the perimeter, branches tangled like the hands of some giant, restless creature. The front gate was rusted shut, but the fence was broken at one corner, enough for me to squeeze through. My first impression of the building itself was all mixed with unease. The main structure was a hulking, Gothic-inspired monstrosity, its brickwork crumbling in places, windows smashed or blackened with soot. The main doors were gone entirely, leaving only a gaping maw that seemed to inhale the light of the day. I hesitated at the threshold, my pulse quickening, not with fear but anticipation. Inside, the air was cool and damp. My footsteps echoed through the hallways, bouncing off walls that were peeling with age and neglect. The smell of mold was overpowering, but beneath it, I thought I caught something else, a faint metallic tang, like blood. I shook it off. I always shook it off. I carried only a flashlight and my camera. I planned to document everything, but as soon as I stepped inside, I realized that the flashlight wasn't enough. The shadows seemed almost alive, stretching in impossible ways, pooling in corners where the light shouldn't reach. The building groaned as if protesting my intrusion, and I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. I moved through the hallways, snapping photos, trying to capture the eerie beauty of decay. Rusted bed frames in what had been patient rooms, discarded medical equipment half buried under dust, walls covered in strange, faded symbols, scribbles, scratches, and what looked disturbingly like handprints pressed into the plaster. I told myself it was just residue from years of abandonment, but my stomach tightened every time I looked at them. The further I went, the more I felt it, that sense that I wasn't entirely alone. It started as a whisper at the back of my mind, the subtle brush of movement in my peripheral vision. I chalked it up to exhaustion, to nerves. But when I reached the old surgical wing, I knew it was something else. The surgical wing was worse than I imagined. Rusted tables lined the floor, each one stained with the ghosts of procedures long forgotten. Instruments were scattered across countertops, jagged and ominous in their stillness. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I swear I saw a figure at the far end of the room, standing perfectly still. I called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" Nothing. The figure didn't move. I swallowed hard and stepped forward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The shadows were just shadows, right? That's what I told myself. I moved on, deeper into the building. The West Wing was where the patients had been housed. Long corridors with rows of rooms, doors hanging off their hinges. I noticed that many of the rooms had personal items left behind. A tattered blanket, a shoe, a small photograph in a rusted frame. I picked up the photograph. It was of a young girl, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Something about it made my chest tighten. I put it down and kept walking. I had to see the basement. Stories of the sanitarium always mentioned the basement, the experiments, the disappearances. I found the stairs at the end of a long, narrow hall. The air grew colder as I descended. My breath fogged in front of me. The basement was a labyrinth of tunnels and rooms. Most were empty, but some still held remnants of whatever had taken place here. I found cages, some small, some large, and a row of lockers, each with a name crudely etched into the metal. I didn't know what I expected to find down there, but nothing could have prepared me for the smell. It was sweet, almost sickly, mixed with something foul. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint at first, coming from the darkness ahead. "Get out." I froze. My flashlight shook. "Hello," I said again, louder. No response. Just a whisper, repeating, taunting me. I could feel it crawling along my skin, cold and sticky. I turned to leave, but the staircase was gone. Not physically gone, just not there. The walls had shifted, the floor seemed to tilt. Panic surged through me. I ran down the basement corridors, trying door after door, all locked or blocked. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, echoing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My flashlight flickered, and I felt the cold brush of a hand along my shoulder. I spun around. Empty. Finally, I stumbled into a room that looked like a patient's lounge. Old furniture littered the floor, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper. But in the middle of the room was a single chair facing the corner. In it sat a figure. I froze. The figure was small, hunched over, but its face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pale surface that seemed to pulse in the dim light. And then it spoke. Not a whisper this time. A voice, low and guttural, that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't be here." I tried to respond, tried to say something, anything, but my voice was gone. The chair shifted and the figure turned slightly, just enough for me to see what it had in its hands. A photograph, the same photograph I had seen upstairs of the young girl. The figure raised it slowly, showing me the smiling face, then tore it in half. And as it did, the walls seemed to breathe, the ceiling sagged, and the shadows moved with intent. I ran, or at least I tried to. The corridors were no longer linear, the doors were mocking me, and the basement seemed to stretch on forever. Every so often, I'd see glimpses of other figures, patients, nurses, doctors, all faceless, all silent, watching me. Some held instruments, others held photographs, all of them waiting. Hours must have passed. Days, maybe. I don't know. Eventually, I stumbled into a room that looked like the main lobby. Sunlight streamed in through the broken windows, and I could see the gate outside. Freedom. But the lobby was empty. Too empty. I took a cautious step forward and froze. There, written on the wall in what looked like dry blood, were words that made my stomach drop. "You are never leaving." I spun around, looking for a way out, and that's when I saw it. A figure at the far end of the lobby, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. This one had a mouth, wide and impossibly stretched, filled with teeth like shards of glass, and it smiled at me. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. I remember the gate, the rush of air, the sunlight blinding me. I remember the trees, the overgrown grass, the sounds of the world outside. I collapsed on the ground, shaking, hyperventilating. I thought it was over. I I thought I was free. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the corridors, the shadows, the faceless figures. And then, this morning, I found something on my doorstep. A photograph. It was me, standing in the Willow Creek Sanitarium, smiling in a way that didn't reach my eyes. I burned it. I tore it apart. I told myself it was a prank. It's not. I know it's not. Because last night, I heard a whisper outside my window. Come back. And now, I can't stop thinking about it. About the shadows. About the basement. About the figures that are waiting just beyond the edges of sight. I don't know how they move or how they see me. I only know that something went wrong when I stepped into that building, and it's not done with me. I tried to stay away from abandoned places since then. Try to forget. But the Willow Creek Sanitarium has a way of finding you. And I just know, that if I go back, even once, I may never leave. So, I warn you, curiosity kills. Curiosity opens doors that should never be opened. And some places like Willow Creek never forget. And I think it's only a matter of time before they come for me again. I didn't plan on going to the Old Marrow Creek Hospital that night. Honestly, I didn't even know the place existed until I stumbled across it in a faded blog post buried in some forgotten corner of the internet. The post was short, almost a warning. Do not go inside. The building remembers. That was enough to draw me in. Curiosity has always been my weakness. It was late October when I arrived. The air was cold and damp, heavy with fog that rolled off the nearby river. The hospital sat on a hill, looming like a dark sentinel over the small town below. Its windows were shattered, and the brickwork was crumbling, streaked with decades of rain and neglect. Ivy crept up the walls, grasping as if trying to hold the building together. There was a feeling there, something in the air, like the place had been waiting for me. I parked my car at the edge of the overgrown driveway and approached on foot. The main entrance was boarded up, but one side door had been pried open years ago, leaving a narrow gap just big enough for me to squeeze through. The smell hit me immediately. Stale air mixed with mildew and something else, something metallic, faint but unmistakable. Inside, the hospital was a monument to decay. Hallways stretched ahead, dark and silent, the floors littered with debris. Rusted beds, broken wheelchairs, and crumbling plaster created a surreal landscape. I clicked on my flashlight, but it barely penetrated the shadows, and I felt the chill crawl down my spine. I moved slowly, documenting everything. I had my camera, but the lens seemed to distort the hallways, making them longer than they should be. I paused at a nurse's station, where patient files were scattered across a desk, yellowed with age. Flipping through one, I saw names, dates, and brief notes, so ordinary yet somehow haunting. Some names repeated across pages, always with unexplained gaps in dates, and notes that made no sense. Subject observed disappearing in corridor. Patient found standing in stairwell. No memory. I shivered and moved on. The further I went, the more I felt it, the sensation that someone or something was watching me. I rationalized it as paranoia at first, but then I noticed the shadows behaving oddly. They didn't move like shadows normally do. They seemed to cling, stretching toward me just at the corner of my vision. I reached what had been the psychiatric wing. The doors were broken, hanging on rusted hinges. Inside, the rooms were small, clinical, and suffocating. Some still had beds, their springs exposed, mattresses rotting. In one room, I found a small chair tipped on its side. On the floor near were scratches, deep and jagged, like nails had gouged the linoleum. I heard the first whisper then. It was faint, almost a breath, coming from somewhere down the hall. Leave now. I froze, telling myself it was the wind or my imagination. I moved on, but the whisper followed, louder, more insistent. I wanted to run, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, propelled me deeper. At the end of the hall, I found a stairwell leading to the basement. The hospital's dark secrets were said to be there. I descended carefully. The basement smelled worse than the upper floors, a mixture of rot and iron, thick in the air. The walls were lined with old lockers, some open, revealing medical tools, jars filled with strange specimens and scattered papers. I found a door that led to a long corridor. The air felt heavier here. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I saw movement, shapes shifting at the edges of light. I swallowed hard and moved forward. It was then I realized the whispers weren't coming from the building itself. They were coming from the photographs scattered along the floor. Old black and white images of patients and staff, their faces blurred, scratched out, eyes hollow. As I passed, I could have sworn some of them turned to look at me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired. But then something impossible happened. The hallway seemed to stretch. The walls elongated. The ceiling rose higher, and the exit I thought I had seen vanished. Every door I tried was either blocked or led to another endless hallway. Panic set in. I ran. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light. And that's when I saw them. Figures. At first, I thought they were shadows, but they were solid, tall, gaunt, and pale, their faces featureless. They didn't move toward me, didn't chase. They just stood, watching, waiting. I ran past, and for a moment, it seemed like they were everywhere, multiplying behind me. I stumbled into a room that looked like an operating theater. The ceiling had collapsed in parts, but I could make out rusted surgical tables and instruments strewn across the floor. On one table lay a patient file, open. The name caught my eye, Abigail Marrow. I didn't know why, but I picked it up. The pages described experiments, attempts to prolong life, to manipulate perception, to teach the building to see. The notes were written in a frantic hand, interspersed with warnings. Do not allow the observers to awaken. Observers. That's what the notes called them. And suddenly I understood. They weren't shadows, not exactly. They were something else. Something tied to the building itself. The hospital had been teaching them, raising them from whatever liminal space existed here, feeding them fragments of human presence. And now I was in their territory. I dropped the file. The figures moved, slowly, deliberately, closing in from all sides. I ran, turning corner after corner, the whispers rising into a chorus of unintelligible words. Doors that should have led outside led to the same dark corridors, and stairwells looped endlessly. I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on the concrete. My flashlight went out. I was in total darkness. My heart pounded as the whispers grew louder, overlapping, almost tangible. And then I saw light. A faint, golden light through a crack in the wall. I crawled toward it, hands trembling. The light led to a small room, almost like a shrine, filled with photographs, candles long burned out, and a single mirror. I approached the mirror cautiously. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't just me. Behind my image, shadowy figures pressed close, faceless, countless, their presence oppressive. I tried to scream. Nothing came out, and then my reflection moved independently. It smiled. And that's when I realized the truth. The hospital didn't want to kill me. It wanted to keep me, to make me part of it, part of the observers. I saw it then, clearly. The corridor I thought I had entered, the endless hallways, the basements, all of it was the hospital's mind, its body, and I had walked straight inside. I had only one option. I reached toward the mirror, instinctively touching the glass, and felt my reflection press back. Not solid, but cold like water. I pulled. The mirror didn't break. It yielded. I stepped through. I emerged in the parking lot. The hospital sat on the hill, silent, seemingly abandoned again. No broken windows, no ivy, no signs of decay. It looked normal, too normal. The fog had cleared. The stars were bright. My car was where I had left it. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. But then, when I glanced down at my camera, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The photos I had taken inside the hospital, each one showed me differently. In some, my eyes were empty, hollow like the patient's. In others, faceless figures loomed behind me, their presence undeniable. And in one final photo, one I hadn't taken, I saw myself standing at the entrance, smiling, holding a sign that said, "I am home now." I dropped the camera. My hands were shaking. I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was a trick of light, a malfunction. But deep down, I knew the truth. The hospital hadn't let me go. Not really. It had marked me, tethered me, in a way that no one could see. I left town the next morning, never looking back. But sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the corner of my vision. My reflection sometimes lingers a moment too long, smiles a moment too wide. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that Marrow Creek Hospital is waiting. And one day, it will call me back. Until then, I walk among the living, but part of me belongs to the building now, a silent observer, waiting, watching, tethered forever to a place that remembers everything. And maybe, just maybe, one day, it will want more than a part of me. I've always been the type of person who couldn't resist abandoned places. Old factories, shuttered schools, forgotten hospitals. They called to me in a way I could never explain. Most people I know wouldn't step foot in one, but I'd always felt that the stories, the remnants, were worth the risk. I wish that night had been the exception, but it wasn't. I found the Dawson textile mill on a map, a crumbling factory on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania. It had been abandoned for nearly 50 years after a series of accidents that killed half the night crew one winter. No one would talk about it. The locals would just cross themselves and whisper about the cursed machines and the screams that sometimes echoed on cold nights. Of course, that was exactly why I had to go. It was late November, and the air had that biting chill that makes every breath sting. The mill sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by bare trees whose branches scratched against the gray sky like fingers. From the outside, it looked smaller than I expected, but as soon as I stepped inside, I realized the building swallowed light whole. The roof sagged in places, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. Dust hung thick, disturbed only by the shafts of moonlight that cut through the broken windows. I switched on my flashlight and stepped carefully, keeping my eyes on the floor. Old machinery loomed around me. Rusted looms, broken spinning wheels, conveyor belts frozen mid-motion. The smell was sharp, metal, oil, and rot. I pulled out my camera and began taking photos, trying to document everything. The shadows seemed too dark, too solid, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as though the building itself were aware of me. I moved through the main hall, where the machines were lined up like sentinels, and came across the old office area. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers scattered and yellowed. I picked up a stack and sifted through them. Payroll records, maintenance logs, and a few notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. One line caught my eye. "The whispers are stronger at night. They know we're here." I laughed nervously. Whispers, sure. Probably just the wind through the broken walls, I said to myself. But the laughter sounded hollow. The main floor led to the basement. That's where the real stories began, according to what little I had read. The basement had been the scene of the worst accidents. They said people would go down there to fix broken machines and never return. I hesitated, flashlight trembling in my hand, but curiosity, or stupidity, pushed me forward. The stairwell smelled worse than the rest of the building. Mold, rust, something organic I couldn't place. Each step groaned beneath me. When I reached the basement, I realized the space was far larger than I had imagined. Ceilings low, support beams looming, and shadows that seemed to shift even when I stood still. The machinery here was ancient, half buried under dust and debris. I was scanning the room when I heard it, the first whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like wind brushing against metal. "Go leave." I froze. My hand gripped the flashlight tighter. "Hello," I called. My voice echoed, hollow and small. No answer. I told myself I was imagining it and pressed on. The further I went, the stronger the feeling became that I was not alone. Shadows pooled in corners, but I could make out shapes, figures, maybe, but I couldn't tell for sure. Something about them didn't obey the rules of light. They weren't moving like living things, but they were there, waiting. I found a small maintenance room. Doors rusted shut long ago. Peering inside through a gap, I saw a desk with a single photograph lying on it. I recognized the building immediately. It was the mill, but the people in the photo were strange. Their faces were blurred, as if smeared, and their eyes were hollow, black voids. One of them looked directly at the camera, or rather, through it, like it was aware I was watching. I shivered and stepped back, tripping over a piece of pipe. That's when I noticed the temperature drop. My breath fogged, and a faint humming started in my ears. I turned in a circle. The basement seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors and rooms I hadn't seen before. Doors that shouldn't exist led to more hallways. I realized then that the building itself had changed. Panic set in. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything was different. Shadows pressed closer, shapes taking form just at the edge of my vision. I glimpsed them, workers from decades past, or what had become of them. Their faces blank, their limbs too long, some crawling along walls or hanging from ceilings as if defying gravity. They didn't speak, but their presence was suffocating. I ran down twisting corridors, over broken machinery, tripping and scraping myself. Whispers filled the air, overlapping into a chorus that made my head spin. "Stay, join us, don't leave." And then I saw it. The main floor again, or at least it looked like it. Moonlight spilling through broken windows, the office area visible in the distance. Relief surged through me, but I stopped cold. On the floor in front of me was my own body. It was lying there, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. I stumbled back, tripping again. The whispers turned into laughter, low, guttural, inhuman. My body, or whatever that was, remained on the ground, staring at me, with dead certainty. I ran past it, heart hammering. I didn't stop, didn't look back until I found an exit. The door was there, just as it should have been. Outside, the night was cold but calm. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, the fog lifting. The mill looked abandoned again, harmless almost, but my hands were shaking, my chest tight with terror. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. I didn't realize what had truly happened until the next morning. I woke up in my apartment, but something was off. My reflection in the mirror moved differently, slightly delayed, as though it wasn't following me, but observing me. My phone was on the counter, but all my photos from the night were gone. Every trace of the mill had vanished from my memory, except for the fear, the unshakable sense that something followed me home. Days later, I noticed it in small ways. Objects in my apartment moved slightly when I wasn't looking. Shadows lingered longer than they should. I felt eyes on me constantly. And then, one night, I woke to see figures standing just beyond the glass of my window. Pale, faceless, watching. I blinked and they were gone, but I knew they hadn't really left. That was when I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped the mill. The mill had escaped me. Whatever had touched me that night, whatever had whispered and watched, had followed me into the world of the living. I wasn't entirely me anymore, and part of the building was now alive inside me. I tried to warn people online, tried to explain, but the words never come out right. Every time I type, something corrects them, changes them, as if whatever is inside me wants its own story told. I can feel it moving, growing, waiting. I went back once, months later, under the guise of curiosity, needing to see if it was real. The mill was gone, completely gone. Nothing remained but a patch of overgrown land. No windows, no doors, no structure. Just the wind in the trees and the distant hum of the town. I know the truth now. Some places don't stay abandoned. Some places wait, learning, growing, and when they're ready, they follow. They don't just haunt buildings, they haunt you. And I know it won't be long before the mill calls me again. I can feel it in my bones. Something went wrong that night, and now I carry it with me. I'm not sure what will happen next, but one thing is certain. I am never truly alone, and the Dawson textile mill isn't finished with me yet. Because some places don't forget. I've been obsessed with abandoned places for as long as I can remember. The older, rustier, and more decrepit, the better. There's a beauty in decay, a sort of melancholy poetry that makes the air feel alive with secrets. But I've learned that some places are abandoned for a reason, and that reason isn't always human. I found the Crosswell Asylum by accident, really. I was researching old psychiatric hospitals in Pennsylvania for a photography project, and the name kept appearing in forums and obscure local history articles. Everyone warned against it, though no one explained why. Some wrote that it was cursed, others said the staff there conducted experiments that never should have existed. All of them ended their warnings with the same advice: do not go alone. I smiled and thought, of course I'll go alone. It was a foggy evening in late October when I arrived. The asylum sat atop a hill, surrounded by a forest that swallowed the last rays of sun. The gates were long gone, twisted metal jutting from the ground like skeletal fingers. I parked a little way off and approached on foot, flashlight in hand. The air was heavy with rot and mildew, a smell that clung to my clothes and hair. The front entrance was wide open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. I stepped inside. The air was cold, impossibly cold, and damp, like the building itself exhaled in warning. The walls were lined with peeling paint and faded posters of long-forgotten treatments. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, though I was careful to tread lightly. I moved through the main hall, snapping photos of everything. Rusted wheelchairs, broken beds, and shattered glass littered the floor. In some of the patient rooms, personal belongings were still left behind. A torn shoe, a doll missing its eyes, scraps of fabric curled yellow with age. I picked up a small notebook and flipped through it. The handwriting was spidery and uneven, filled with sketches of figures that had no faces, their arms stretching into impossible lengths. Notes scribbled in the margins read, "They watch. They wait." I laughed at myself, telling myself it was just paranoia. But I didn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Shadows moved oddly here, stretching along walls even when I wasn't moving. I chalked it up to fatigue, telling myself the fog outside had warped the light. I found a stairwell leading to the basement and hesitated. This was the place people mentioned in the forums, the heart of the asylum's darkest stories. Patients had disappeared down there, or worse. Staff had vanished, some presumed dead. The air down there was heavy, almost viscous, as I descended, each step creaking in protest. The basement was larger than I expected, a maze of hallways and rooms that seemed to twist in ways that made no architectural sense. Rusted machinery for electroshock therapy and medical equipment littered the floor. Shadows pooled in the corners, dense and unnatural. My flashlight flickered. I froze. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, something slipping between the beams of light. Then I heard it, a whisper, "Don't go further." I spun, shining the flashlight into every corner, but there was nothing. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was just the wind. I moved forward. I came across a room filled with old patient files, stacked haphazardly on shelves and the floor. As I sifted through them, I noticed something strange. Every name had 2 entries. Each person had died, or was recorded as having been discharged, but then there was a second entry with the same name, months or years later, with no explanation. And next to the second entries, someone had scrawled, "Returned." I felt a chill. I heard the whisper again, closer this time, "Leave before it notices you." The hair on my neck stood on end. I turned down another corridor and noticed the walls here were different. They seemed darker, almost wet, absorbing the light. My flashlight flickered violently. That's when I saw them. Figures standing at the end of the hallway, tall and thin, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. They were featureless, pale, and motionless, as though they had been carved from the shadows themselves. I froze. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. They didn't move, yet I felt their attention like weight pressing against my chest. My breath came shallow. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. When I looked up, they had moved closer, though I hadn't seen them step. Panic finally won. I ran blindly, twisting down hallways that seemed endless. Every door I tried was either blocked or led back to the same hallway, distorted and alien. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus. "Stay, stay, don't leave." I burst into a larger room, what looked like a common area, and froze again. A figure sat in the center, hunched over a chair, rocking slowly. Its face was hidden, but I felt it was watching me. I noticed dozens of photographs scattered across the floor. Patients, staff, all with their eyes blacked out, faces erased. One photo, however, made my blood run cold. It was of me, taken that very day, standing outside the asylum. My mind reeled. How could that be possible? I backed toward the door, heart hammering. The figure slowly raised its head, revealing a hollow, featureless face, yet I felt it was smiling. And then the shadows around it began to pulse, stretching toward me, wrapping around my legs like cold water. I screamed and fought, pulling myself free, and ran toward a hallway that seemed brighter, the end illuminated by moonlight. I pushed through an old emergency exit and stumbled into the night. The forest outside was silent, still. The asylum loomed behind me, dark and unmoving. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing by the side of the road. I thought it was over. I thought I had escaped. But over the next few days, strange things began happening. Mirrors would fog up with handprints that weren't mine. Objects moved in my apartment when I wasn't looking. At night, I'd hear whispers just beyond my bedroom door. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then, one evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple: "You left something behind." Inside was a single attachment, a photograph. I opened it. It was me, sleeping in my bed that night. Only I wasn't alone. Standing over me was one of the featureless figures from the basement, watching. I knew then that I hadn't escaped. I had brought a part of the asylum with me. Whatever had haunted those halls had attached itself to me, tethered me to it in ways I couldn't explain. And it was patient, methodical, waiting for the right moment. The final realization hit me slowly, terrifyingly. I wasn't being haunted just because of curiosity. I was being claimed. The Crosswell Asylum didn't want my life. It wanted my mind, and one day it would take it completely. Until then, I exist in a state of constant vigilance. I leave doors open at night, lights on, windows cracked, hoping to confuse it. But deep down, I know there is no confusing the asylum. It doesn't exist in the normal world. It exists where I exist. It waits in shadows, in mirrors, in the empty spaces I can't see. And I know, inevitably, it will come for me fully. Because some abandoned places aren't just abandoned. They're alive, and Crosswell is hungry. I should have never gone to the Greystone Mill. It wasn't even on the map, at least not on any map you'd expect. I found it mentioned on a forgotten forum about abandoned industrial sites, hidden away in the woods of upstate New York. The post was short and cryptic: Greystone Mill. Do not enter after sunset. It remembers. I laughed at it at the time. Of course I went. It was late November when I arrived. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that swallows the horizon. The road ended abruptly at the edge of forest, and there it was, a hulking brick building, partially collapsed, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had long since fallen into decay. Vines had claimed the walls, and shattered windows stared at me like dark eyes. The air smelled faintly of smoke and rot, and my gut tightened as I climbed over the broken fence. The main entrance had been pried open long ago. The doors hung at odd angles, and I had to duck under a rusted metal frame to get inside. The moment I stepped in, I realized this wasn't just old, it was alive. Not alive in a human way, but alive in that way a place absorbs everything that has happened within it and waits. The air inside was cold, sharper than the outside, and carried a metallic tang. I flicked on my flashlight. Dust motes swirled, catching the beam like tiny stars. The main floor was vast and empty. Old conveyor belts twisted across the floor, rusted machinery looming like the skeletons of giants. I moved slowly, documenting with my camera, but the light felt swallowed by the darkness. Every shadow seemed thicker, almost tactile. I found the office wing first. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers scattered across the floor. One document caught my eye, an accident report from 1973. Someone had fallen into a press and was never found. Just gone. No body. The note was crossed out at the bottom with a single sentence scrawled in frantic handwriting. It claimed him. I shook it off and moved on. There was a stairwell leading to the basement. According to every story I'd read, this was where the real horrors happened. I hesitated, flashlight in hand. The stairs were narrow, the wood rotting beneath me. The air grew colder as I descended, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was massive, far bigger than it should have been. Machines that had been dismantled decades ago were still there, or maybe they had returned. Some are buried in dust, some looked freshly oiled. Shadows pooled unnaturally, and I felt the weight of something watching me. I reminded myself I was alone. Then I heard it, a faint scraping noise coming from the far end of the hall. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand. "Hello," I called, but the sound didn't respond. It just grew closer. I moved toward it anyway. The sound led me to a small room tucked behind a row of rusted machines. Inside were photographs scattered across the floor, black and white images of men and women who had once worked here, all staring directly at the camera. But something was wrong. Their faces were stretched, twisted into expressions of fear and agony. And in some, their eyes seemed hollow, dark holes that drew me in. I began to pick up one photograph. My own face stared back, only it wasn't quite me. The eyes were wrong, the smile too wide. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. That's when I noticed them. Figures in the shadows. Tall, thin, pale, faceless, and moving impossibly smoothly. They didn't make a sound, but I could feel them observing me. Slowly, deliberately, they began to encircle me. I turned and ran. The hallways twisted around me. Doors that should have led out led back into the basement again. I ran blindly, crashing into machines, scraping my arms, but the figures followed, always at the edges of my vision, always watching. I tripped and fell, sliding into a storage closet. My flashlight flickered and died. The room was pitch black. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to quiet my breathing, listening to the whispering that seemed to seep through the walls. Stay. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. I didn't move. I waited, but there was nothing. Slowly, I rose, searching for a way out. The closet door opened into a hallway I hadn't seen before. It led to a staircase, and I ran up, finally breaking through a doorway into the night. The forest was quiet, the wind barely rustling the trees. I stumbled down the hill, heart hammering, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I thought I had escaped. The next morning, I awoke in my apartment, exhausted but safe, or so I thought. But there was something off. Small things were different. My reflection in the mirror lingered a moment longer than it should. Shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense. Objects in my apartment seemed too clean, too perfectly placed. I chalked it up to exhaustion. That night, though, I dreamed of the mill. I was walking its hallways again, the faceless figures watching, the photographs on the floor shifting to show me things I didn't want to see. And then I woke up. My camera was on the bed, though I'd left it in my car. Curiosity, my fatal flaw, made me check the photos. Hundreds of new images, each taken from angles I hadn't touched, showing me sleeping, moving, standing in my apartment. And in the last image, one that wasn't possible, I saw the mill behind me, its windows glowing faintly in the dark, as though it had grown arms and was reaching for me. I realized then that the mill had followed me home. Not physically, at least not yet. It existed in the space around me, in shadows and reflections, in places I couldn't see. And something in me had changed. My dreams were no longer mine. I was awake, but I could feel it inside me, whispering, guiding, learning. I tried to leave. I considered running, moving far away, abandoning everything. But every time I stepped outside, the forest seemed closer, the hill higher, the mill's shape pressing through the fog. It wasn't a building anymore. It was a presence, and it knew me. Weeks passed. I stopped sleeping. I stopped taking photos. I started speaking less, seeing less, hiding from the spaces it could touch. And then I understood. The mill didn't just want to trap me in its walls. It wanted to live through me, to exist in the world I walked in. And the only way to keep it satisfied was for me to show it what the living could offer: attention, fear, fascination. So now I wander. I take notes, I document, I photograph. I tell stories, anything to keep it fed. The whispers are always there, and sometimes, in mirrors, I catch a glimpse of the building itself, writhing, stretching, alive in ways I never imagined. The final truth? I didn't survive Greystone Mill. It survived me, and one day it may step out completely. But until then, I walk among the living, carrying it with me, knowing that it's only a matter of time before the building decides it wants more. Some abandoned places aren't just empty. They wait, and Greystone Mill is patient. I've always had a fascination with abandoned places. Not just the thrill of exploring, but the way they seem to hold on to memories, like the walls themselves remember everything that happened inside. Hospitals, schools, factories. If it had been left behind, I wanted to see it. Most people thought I was reckless, but I told myself it was research. The place I found this time was the old Hartford textile plant, just outside a small town in Ohio. Closed for nearly 40 years, it had been the site of multiple unexplained accidents. A few locals mentioned disappearing workers and strange fires, but nobody would go near it, especially after sunset. That's what drew me. It was a crisp October evening when I arrived. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, and the fog rolling in from the nearby river made the forest around the plant look alive, like it was waiting for me. The gates had been torn down years ago, leaving only rusted posts, and the main doors hung crooked on their hinges. I parked at the edge of the overgrown driveway and approached on foot. Inside, the air was sharp, cold, and smelled like wet iron. Dust clung to everything, disturbed only by my flashlight. The factory was enormous, a maze of hallways, machinery, and offices. Conveyor belts, broken looms, and rusted equipment lined the floor, looming like silent guards. My footsteps echoed, but there was a subtle undertone beneath the sound, almost like a whisper too soft to make out. I moved carefully, taking photographs and notes, trying to document the decay. The offices were frozen in time, scattered papers, rusted filing cabinets, and a calendar still showing the year it closed. I picked up one file. It was a maintenance log with annotations in shaky handwriting. One line stood out. They keep returning. We can't contain them anymore. I shivered and set it down. The stairwell to the basement beckoned, dark and foreboding. People said the worst of the accidents happened down there, where machinery had claimed lives that were never explained. I hesitated, but told myself I could handle it. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder with each step. The basement was vast, larger than I imagined. Corridors stretched in impossible directions, lined with machinery that had no logical arrangement. Shadows pooled in the corners, almost solid. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a sudden weight in the room, like something was pressing down, watching. Then I heard it, a faint scraping like nails on metal. "Hello," I called. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. Nothing responded, but the scraping continued, closer now. I froze, heart pounding. My imagination, I told myself. Probably just rats or falling debris. I moved forward anyway, and that's when I saw them. Figures in the darkness, tall and thin, but not quite human. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles, and their faces were featureless, pale masks. They didn't walk, they glided. They didn't speak, but their presence filled the room with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. I turned and ran, down corridors that seemed to loop endlessly. Every hallway led to another identical hallway. Doors opened to the same spaces I had passed before. Panic set in. My flashlight flickered again, and I tripped, scraping my hands on concrete. When I got up, I stumbled into a room I didn't recognize. It looked like a break room for workers, but it was filled with photographs scattered across the floor. Employees, managers, people I didn't recognize, all staring directly at the camera. Some had their faces scratched out. Others were blurred in ways that made me feel nauseous. I went to pick up one photograph. My heart froze. It was me, standing in the factory that very evening. Only my face was wrong. Hollow eyes, stretched mouth, as though I had been erased and replaced by something else. I turned to run, and the figures were closer, surrounding me now. The shadows stretched toward me, crawling along the walls like living things. I tripped again and fell against a stack of rusted filing cabinets. My flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed me. I felt hands on my arms, cold, insistent, pulling me into the darkness. I screamed, but no sound came. Then a whisper, low and sibilant, echoed in my mind. "Stay, become one of us." I lost track of time. Minutes? Hours? It was impossible to tell. When I finally forced my eyes open, I was no longer in the basement. I was outside, standing in the middle of the overgrown driveway. Moonlight illuminated the factory, but it looked different now. The building was taller, wider, impossible in its symmetry, as if it had grown while I was gone. I ran to my car, shaking, breath ragged, and drove back to town. I didn't stop until I was in my apartment, doors locked, lights on, heart still hammering. I thought it was over. But it wasn't. The next morning, I checked my phone. Dozens of new photos. Not from my camera, not from anything I recognized. They were taken from inside my apartment. Every angle, every room, each photo showing me asleep or moving about. And in each one, the shadows were there, always just beyond the edges of light, faceless, watching. That's when I realized the truth. The factory hadn't just claimed the building or the basement. It had claimed me, not physically, but in every way that mattered. I could feel in my mind a cold, patient presence, studying, learning, growing. It didn't just want to trap me. It wanted me to be a part of it, to become another memory that the building would hold onto forever. Weeks passed. I tried to ignore it. I left lights on, I kept doors open, I moved around carefully, but it adapted, always present, always watching. And then I understood its purpose. It wanted a witness. It wanted someone alive, someone human, to carry its story. So I started documenting again. I write, I photograph, I record. Not to warn anyone, not to escape. The factory doesn't care about that. It just wants attention, fear, fascination. And I'm its conduit. Some nights, when the wind presses against my windows, I can feel the factory's walls stretching, reaching alive. I'm no longer just me. I carry it inside me. And one day I know it will call me back. But this time I won't be running. I'll be going willingly. Because the Greystone Mill, the Hartford textile plant, whatever you call it, some abandoned places don't just remain abandoned. They wait, they remember, and they grow hungry. I shouldn't have gone back. That's what I keep telling myself over and over, but I can't stop thinking about it, about what happened at the old Harrow's Mill. I had been there before, months ago, drawn in by curiosity and a foolish need to prove I wasn't afraid of abandoned places. The mill sat outside a small town in Pennsylvania, an industrial skeleton with broken windows, rusted machinery, and ivy crawling up its brick walls like veins. Everyone in town avoided it, said it was cursed, perfect for me. The first visit had been unsettling. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't. Whispers lingered in the air, and the basement, the place no one ever went, was colder than it had any right to be. I didn't touch anything, didn't go too far, and left shaken but unharmed. Yet something stayed with me. Not fear, not curiosity, something darker, like the building had marked me. Months later, I found myself driving back there. The road was slick with rain, and a dense fog hung over the forest surrounding the mill. Even in daylight, it looked like a place abandoned not just by people, but by reality itself. I parked near the collapsed fence and approached on foot. My flashlight in hand, I slipped through a gap in the door and stepped inside. The air was damp and smelled metallic, as if blood and rust had soaked into the walls. The main floor was empty, the machinery silent, yet the shadows felt heavier than last time, thicker. I clicked on my camera, taking photos as I walked, each flash illuminating fragments of the past, broken looms, fallen beams, and walls lined with peeling posters advertising work shifts long gone. I moved to the stairwell leading to the basement. I didn't want to, but I knew I had to. The basement had been the site of accidents, disappearances, and worse, according to local stories. I descended slowly, the wooden stairs creaking beneath my weight, until I reached the cold concrete floor below. It was bigger than I remembered. Corridors twisted at impossible angles. Machinery I didn't recall seeing before hummed faintly in the darkness. And then I saw them. Figures. At first, I thought they were shadows, tricks of the flashlight. But they moved, gliding silently along the walls, tall and thin, with pale, featureless faces. They didn't speak. They didn't approach. They watched. And when I tried to turn and run, the hallways seemed to stretch endlessly. The doors I thought I recognized leading me in loops. I found a small office room tucked behind a stack of crates. Inside, papers and photographs were scattered across the floor. I bent to pick one up. My blood ran cold. It was a picture of me. I was inside the mill, taken that very day. My expression was blank, my eyes hollow. I dropped it, heart hammering, and turned to leave. That's when I realized the basement wasn't just a basement. It was alive. The walls pulsed, the shadows moved with purpose, and the whispers began. At first soft, almost melodic, then rising into a chorus of unintelligible words. stay joined become. I ran blindly, crashing into machines and knocking over stacks of crates. The figures followed, always just out of reach, silent but undeniable. I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on rusted metal. I scrambled to my feet, desperate for an exit, when I saw a door I hadn't noticed before. It led to a small room, empty except for a single mirror. I approached cautiously. My reflection stared back, only it wasn't quite me. Behind my face, shadowy figures pressed against the glass, their blank faces twisting in silent screams. I stumbled backward. And then I understood. The mill didn't want me trapped. It wanted me to carry it, to take its darkness into the world. My reflection moved independently of me, smiling in ways I couldn't control. I bolted through the mirror. I woke up outside the mill, the sun high in the sky, as if no time had passed. The building looked deserted again, harmless, almost. I laughed shakily, convincing myself it had been a dream, a hallucination born of my obsession. I drove back to town, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. Days later, I noticed subtle changes. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Reflections in mirrors held glimpses of shapes moving behind me. At night, I would wake and see figures at the edges of my vision, pale and silent, always watching. And sometimes my reflection wouldn't match my movements exactly. It took weeks for me to realize the terrifying truth. The mill hadn't let me go. I had taken a part of it with me. Its awareness, its hunger, its presence. And it was patient, studying me, waiting. Then one night it escalated. I woke to find my apartment empty, silent, except for a single photograph on my coffee table. It was me asleep in my own bed, but behind me stood a figure from the basement, tall and pale, featureless, watching. I hadn't taken the photo. Panic consumed me. I tried to leave, to escape, but every time I stepped outside, the streets looked wrong. The buildings stretched oddly, the sky darker than it should be. And always I could see the mill far away in the distance, growing larger with each step I took, waiting. I realized then what it wanted. Not just my fear, not just my attention. It wanted me to go back, to bring myself willingly. And somewhere deep in the shadows of my mind, I wanted to. I don't know how long I've been like this, trapped between the world I knew and the world it's creating. The mill is no longer a place. It's a presence. It exists in mirrors, in shadows, in the spaces I can't see. I know one day it will call me fully, and I won't resist. Some abandoned places aren't abandoned at all. They wait, they watch, and when they're ready, they follow you home. And Harrow's Mill is patient. I don't usually do this. Talk about what happened. People call me reckless, obsessed, or worse. But I can't keep this to myself anymore. Some things don't stay buried, and some abandoned places don't stay abandoned. It started when I heard about the Ellsworth Hotel. Not a big city landmark or anything you'd find in a travel book. Just an old, crumbling building on the outskirts of a small town in Maine. Closed for over 50 years, it had been shut down after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Nobody in town would go near it, especially after sunset. That's exactly why I had to see it. I arrived in late October, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The air was cold, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby ocean and the sharp tang of wet leaves. The hotel sat on a hill, its brick walls blackened with age, windows shattered, and ivy crawling over everything like it was strangling the building. Even from the road, I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, like it was aware I was coming. The front doors were boarded up, but a side entrance had been ripped open long ago. I squeezed through the gap, flashlight in hand. The lobby was a ruin. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the beam of my light. Broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a grand staircase that had lost several steps loomed before me. I could hear my own footsteps echoing in the silence, but beneath that there was something else, a faint scraping like fingernails on wood. I told myself it was nothing. Rats maybe, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach said otherwise. I moved through the lobby, taking photos and notes, documenting everything for my personal project. Most of the rooms were empty, but in some, old belongings remained. A cracked porcelain doll, a journal with pages yellowed and curling, a broken mirror. The staircase led to the upper floors, where the rooms had once been guest suites. The air was colder here, and the shadows longer. I reached the third floor and found a hallway lined with doors, each slightly ajar. A strange energy pulsed through the hall, like the building was breathing. I stepped cautiously, flashlights sweeping over the peeling wallpaper and broken glass. Then I saw movement. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the light. But one of the doors at the end of the hall creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. Pale, impossibly thin, with dark hollows where eyes should be. It didn't speak, but I felt it watching. My heart pounded as I raised my camera. The figure didn't move away. It just waited, and the air grew heavier with every second I stayed. I backed away slowly, my foot hitting something soft. I looked down and nearly screamed. It was a photograph lying on the floor. I picked it up and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, taken that very day, standing outside the hotel. Only my face was wrong, blank, expressionless, like someone had erased it. Panic hit me and I ran. Hallways twisted and shifted, leading me to rooms I didn't recognize. Doors opened to spaces that weren't supposed to exist. Long corridors lined with mirrors that reflected shadows that weren't mine. I realized then that the hotel wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, and it remembered everything. I reached what I thought was the stairwell, but when I stepped inside, I was back on the third floor. The figure appeared again, this time in the doorway across from me. And then I heard it, not a voice, not words, but a series of faint whispers that crawled into my mind. Stay joined, become. I ran blindly, heart hammering, until I stumbled into the ballroom. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting pale rectangles on the dusty floor. Chandeliers swayed slightly, though no wind moved them. And there, in the center of the room, were dozens of figures, silent, faceless, gliding toward me. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed. The figures surrounded me, pressing close, their presence overwhelming. I felt my own body grow heavy, limbs moving as if they weren't mine. And then, suddenly they stopped. The room went silent. The figures receded, leaving me alone, or so I thought. I bolted through a door I hadn't noticed before. It led to the roof. Moonlight washed over me, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. The town lay below, quiet and unknowing. I climbed down the fire escape and ran until the hotel was out of sight. I thought I had escaped. The next morning, I woke in my apartment, trembling but alive. Everything seemed normal. I told myself it had been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and obsession. But then I noticed something, a photograph on my nightstand. I didn't take it. It was me, asleep, and in the corner of the image, the faint outline of a tall, faceless figure watching. I panicked, throwing across the room. Over the next few days, strange things happened. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Mirrors reflected glimpses of shapes that moved independently of me. Objects shifted when I wasn't looking. And then I realized the truth. The hotel had followed me home. Not physically, but in a way far worse. It had attached itself to me. Its awareness, its hunger, its presence. I tried to ignore it, to leave lights on, to avoid dark rooms, but it adapted. It was patient, always watching, always waiting. And I began to change. My dreams were no longer my own. My reflection didn't always match my movements. And late at night, I could hear whispers that weren't coming from anyone but me. Then, one evening, I woke to find the hotel in my apartment. Not physically, not fully, but its shape was there in the corner, walls stretching impossibly, corridors opening where there should be none. And in that moment, I understood I was never going to leave. Not really. The hotel didn't just want to claim me. It wanted me to exist as part of it, to become one with its memory, to carry its darkness into the world. I don't try to escape anymore. I stay awake, documenting, photographing, recording, anything to feed it, to satisfy it. It's patient, and so am I. I know one day it will take me fully, and I will willingly step into its halls, leaving nothing behind but shadows and whispers for someone else to find. Some abandoned places aren't just abandoned. They wait, they watch, and when they're ready, they follow. And the Ellsworth Hotel is patient. I should have never driven out that night, but I couldn't resist. I've been chasing abandoned places for years. Old hospitals, factories, schools. But something about the Ralston paper mill called to me like nothing else. Closed since the early 70s, the town whispered about it. Accidents, disappearances, fires that never made sense. People claimed the building had a weight to it, like it remembered everything that happened inside. The road leading to the mill was narrow, lined with trees whose bare branches clawed at the sky. Fog rolled off the river and pressed against my windshield, reducing visibility to a few feet. By the time I arrived, the sun was gone, leaving only a gray sky and the silhouette of the mill against the dark horizon. I parked on a cracked asphalt lot and approached on foot. The main gate had long since fallen apart. Rusted chain links sagged in a heap, and the brick walls of the mill were streaked black with age. Broken windows reflected the moonlight, like countless empty eyes staring at me. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't go inside. Of course, I went inside. The front doors had been pried open decades ago. I slipped in, flashlight in hand. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of rust, mold, and something I couldn't place, something almost organic. Dust floated in the beams of light. The factory floor was vast, silent except for the creak of floorboards under my feet. Rusted machinery, conveyor belts frozen mid-motion, and broken looms loomed around me like frozen giants. I started documenting, snapping photos, taking notes. Everything was as expected until I reached the office area. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers strewn across the floor. Most of the logs were mundane, but one caught my eye. An employee's note scratched in a hurry. They are still here. Don't go into the basement. I paused. Of course I went to the basement. The stairwell was narrow and dark. The smell grew stronger as I descended, a mixture of mold, rust, and something else. Rotting, but not quite human. Each step groaned beneath my weight. When I reached the bottom, I realized the basement was bigger than the building should allow. Corridors stretched endlessly, rooms branching off into places I didn't remember seeing on the blueprints I'd found online. I walked down one hallway and froze. Shadows move along the walls, too fast, too fluid to be cast by anything I could see. At first, I told myself it was my imagination. Then I heard whispers, soft, unintelligible, but unmistakably close. "Go leave, stay." I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing. My pulse raced. I moved cautiously forward. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus that pressed against my mind like water filling my skull. I found a room at the far end, doors hanging off their hinges. Inside were photographs scattered across the floor, workers, managers, visitors, all staring blankly at the camera. Some faces were scratched out, others blurred. I stepped closer and realized something that made my blood run cold. The last photo was of me, taken that night, standing at the edge of the doorway. My face was wrong, expressionless, hollow eyes. The air thickened, the shadows pulsed. Figures began to emerge. Tall, thin, featureless shapes that didn't walk but glided, circling me, patient and silent. I backed up, tripping over loose boards. The whispers became voices inside my head. "Join us, stay, forever." Panic surged. I ran blindly through the maze of hallways. Doors that should have led to the main floor twisted, leading me back deeper into the basement. My flashlight flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed me. I felt them then, hands on my arms, cold and insistent. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, absorbed into the shadows. My body felt heavy, sluggish, as if I wasn't entirely in control. I tried to pull free, but the shapes pressed closer, wrapping around me, pulling at something I didn't understand. And then, unexpectedly, I was outside. The moon was high, the fog thick but not oppressive. The mill loomed behind me, silent and still. I ran without looking back until I reached my car and drove away. I thought I had escaped. The next day, I woke in my apartment. Everything seemed normal. I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, the product of obsession and exhaustion. But then I noticed small things, shadows that lingered too long, reflections that didn't quite match my movements, objects slightly moved when I wasn't looking. It took a week for me to understand. The mill hadn't let me go. It had followed me, not physically, but through perception, through space, through reality itself. Its presence pressed against the edges of my vision, intruding into my life. Then I noticed the photographs. They started appearing little by little, on my nightstand, my desk, and my wallet. Each one showed me somewhere I'd been recently, but with shadows pressing in closer, faces emerging where they shouldn't. The final image, left on my pillow one night, showed the mill itself, looming impossibly large, stretching its walls toward me, reaching. I realized then the truth. The mill doesn't exist as a building. It exists where I exist, and one day, it will take me completely. Weeks turned into months. The whispers became words I could understand. You belong to us. You belong here. And I knew I could fight, resist, ignore it, but why would I? The mill had shown me its secret. It thrives on fear, fascination, and attention. I am its witness, its conduit. I don't go outside much anymore. I write, I photograph, I document, but only for it. The mill is patient, and so am I. One day, it will claim me fully, and when it does, I will step willingly into its halls. Because some abandoned places are never abandoned. They wait, they watch, and the Ralston paper mill, it has been waiting for me all along. I've been chasing abandoned places for years. Some people call it reckless. I call it exploration. There's something about these buildings left to rot and decay that feels alive. Most of the time, it's just walls and dust. Sometimes it's not. I first heard about the Blackwood Asylum from an old article buried in the archives of a local library in upstate New York. Closed in 1969, it had been the site of mysterious disappearances, strange experiments, and unexplained deaths. No one in the nearby town went near it, and the road signs pointing to the entrance were faded beyond recognition. The warnings intrigued me. I arrived on a cold November morning. The forest surrounding the asylum swallowed the last light of day, fog curling around the skeletal trees. The building itself was worse than I imagined. Brick walls blackened by years of smoke and rain, shattered windows like empty eyes, and the main gate twisted in on itself. Even from the road, the asylum seemed to exhale a slow, deliberate breath that made the hair on my neck rise. The doors were ajar, warped by years of neglect. I slipped inside, flashlight in hand. The air was thick with rot and mildew. Dust hung like fog, disturbed only by my footsteps. The lobby was massive but empty, furniture broken and decayed, posters warning of diseases long forgotten clinging to the walls. Shadows pooled in the corners, and I had the strange sensation that they were moving just beyond my vision. I moved through the main floor, documenting everything. Wheelchairs rusted in corners, beds stripped of sheets, patient files spilling from overturned cabinets. One journal caught my eye. The handwriting was spidery, almost frantic. Sketches of faceless figures filled page after page, limbs stretching impossibly, mouths open in silent screams. A single line repeated in the margins. They follow the sound of footsteps. They always follow. I shivered and told myself it was just imagination. The stairwell leading to the basement loomed ahead. This was where the stories said the worst had happened. I hesitated, then descended. The air grew colder with each step, damp and thick, almost tangible. At the bottom, the basement stretched wider than I expected, a labyrinth of machinery, storage rooms, and hallways that seemed to twist in impossible directions. Then I heard it, a scraping sound. At first, I thought it was rats or falling debris, but it came again, deliberate, slow, moving toward me. I froze, flashlight shaking in my hand. Shadows stretched along the walls, darker than they should have been. I stepped forward and froze again. Figures emerged from the corners of the basement, tall, thin, faceless. They didn't move like people. They glided, silent, deliberate. I wanted to run, but the hallways seemed to twist and fold, turning me in circles. Every corridor I tried led me back to the same room, a small storage space filled with photographs scattered on the floor. I better pick one up. My heart stopped. It was me, standing outside the asylum, taken that very day. Only my face was wrong, blank, hollowed, expressionless. I dropped the photo, and a whisper filled the room. Stay, become one of us. I bolted. Hallways stretched endlessly, doors opening to the same spaces I'd already passed. My flashlight flickered and died. I stumbled in the darkness, tripping over debris, hands scraping against concrete and metal. And then I felt them. Touch. Cold, insistent, grabbing at my arms, my legs, my chest. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed. My body felt heavy, as if it no longer belonged to me. My vision blurred, shapes moving in impossible ways, stretching across walls, floor, ceiling. I realized the asylum wasn't just a building. It was alive, and it had claimed me. Then something unexpected happened. I woke up on the forest road outside the asylum, the fog curling around me, heart pounding, body aching. I was free, or so I thought. The next day, I noticed the first changes. Mirrors reflected shapes moving behind me, shadows that weren't mine. Objects shifted when I wasn't looking. I could hear whispers when the house was quiet. And then I saw the photographs. They appeared scattered on my bed, my desk, in my wallet, images of me from angles I didn't remember being photographed, always with dark figures looming behind me. I tried to leave, to escape the city, the state, even the country. But every time I stopped to rest, I glimpsed the asylum, impossibly close, its windows glowing faintly, as if it had grown arms to reach out to me. Weeks turned into months. I started documenting it, photographs, notes, journals, anything to appease it. I realized the Blackwood Asylum didn't just want me to witness it. It wanted me to carry it, to keep its memory alive, to feed it through fear and attention. One night, I made a choice. I returned, not to explore, not to escape, but to surrender. I drove back through the fog, parked near the collapse gate, and walked inside with a calm I hadn't felt before. The shadows welcomed me, the whispers stopped. The basement stretched before me, corridors twisting like before. And for the first time, I felt a home. The asylum had always waited for me, and I had become part of it. Now, when people ask about abandoned places, I tell them stories. I show photographs. I guide the curious to locations that are safe to explore. But some nights, when the wind presses against my windows, I can feel the walls of Blackwood extending, alive in the shadows of my apartment. I'm no longer just a man. I am a witness, a vessel, part of a memory that refuses to end. Some abandoned places are never empty. They wait, they watch, and when they find someone willing, they take them willingly, body, mind, and soul. And Blackwood Asylum, it's patient.
Your support keeps the horror alive, like comment and subscribe before you go.